Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to another episode of Record Breakers, your fun book club for music between the four of us. I'm Petey Rave, your man with no plan. Here with me is my crew, my team, my squad. We've got Brett.
Ahoy hoy.
We've got Patrick.
Hello.
And we've got Drew.
Hey.
Yes, we're here, of course, gathered to talk about music, and the provider of the music is none other than me. I'm providing music for us this week, and the album that I brought forth for you guys is a little bit of some Korean indie. I'm going back to some Korean indie independent music, a little bit of a cool, sort of a semi-supergroup, I guess you would call it, or just like a little group of musicians from other groups and veteran musicians in the Korean scene by the name of Life in Time. And the album is Land. I imagine I know the answer, but let's go talk about expectations. I'll start with Drew. Drew, what were your expectations coming into this album?
Well, this was a album from South Korea that was brought by Petey Rave. So I assumed that the production work on the record was going to be pretty stellar. I was assuming that there was going to be some very clean, good vocals. And I also assumed that there would be some pretty solid musicianship, no matter what the style of music that I was sort of getting out of. Because indie is such a broad term. I was like, okay, well, we're going in something. Let's see how good the musicality is, because usually stuff that Petey brings us from South Korea tends to be pretty good musically. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, what were your expectations coming into this?
Coming in blind, but with the knowledge that historically I have liked a fair amount of the indie music you brought from Korea. So coming in blind, but optimistic.
Mm-hmm. Brett, what were your expectations?
I mean, let's be honest here. Ain't none of us know what we were getting into. And with the fact that one genre, Korean indie music, has traveled through many roads and over many hills and given us many different products, I was really unsure of what I was going to get. And Jesus, do I have things to say about what I found?
Yes.
I think we all do.
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to talk about this. I kind of picked this album after barely having listened to it, just because I finally found that this band had a full album. I knew a couple of songs, but I didn't know that they had. Well, I guess I didn't think to look for a full album. This was a band that I had heard of a little bit before, and on my food tour while I was in Korea, the person leading the food tour, as we were talking about like Korean bands, like mentioned them, and for a reason. They're veteran musicians. They consist of Sunbin, the bassist for the previously mentioned band The Cox, previously reviewed a little while back. Jinsil from another band called Laurels, and the drummer Im Sang-wook. All of them like musicians that have been around for a little while. And this is a cool record. This is like, it has a mix of a lot of things. Like I found it hard to like try to figure out how I was going to be describing it, because I don't know how to do these things. So it's like the Korean Indie review of KoreanIndie.com review of this says that the group ramped up their math rock, blues rock, and rock and roll undertones. They talk about polyrhythmic hooks, bluesy chord progressions. It's a lot of things that are like going on there. Very kind of complex stuff, rhythm wise. There's a little bit of like psychedelia, but by way of like 90s alternative group, like how 90s alternative rock interpreted old psychedelic music. Like a little bit like that. There's a little bit of Jane's Addiction in there, in particular. There's a little bit of like other groups as well. Yeah, you guys are a little bit better at describing this musically. Drew, how will you describe the themes elements of this record?
Well, like I said, I was sort of expecting, like, I think we were all expecting something a little different than this. I expected it to be sort of a pretty, like, well-polished sort of thing. And not that it wasn't well-polished, but, like, right off the bat, you get this, like, very, almost like classic / like hard rock sort of tone to it. A very gritty guitar work, right? And it had that throwback sound to it that I sort of had to like make sure this was a newer band because I was a little confused. Like I was like, okay, but it was really solid, right? The guitar work was really, really good, and that's what led the record in and led the record through. Was those like Petey said, the bluesy, classic sort of rock undertones that really throwback sound. But at times it got into this like sort of funky, sort of groovy math rock sort of smoothness to it that was really fun. The bass work here also was just absolutely stellar, in my opinion, just awesome. And then you had like those tracks that would go from like a crunchy verse to like a swelling sort of chorus that was really cool. And it was really surprising with how intricate the music actually was. There was a lot going on and it bounced around to a lot of different things, but it all sounded really good and it was all a lot of fun. So can't complain.
Patrick, how would you describe this album musically? What would be the themes elements that make it up?
There's elements of indie rock. There's elements of sort of garage rock. There's drums that sound like they may have accidentally fallen off of a prog record and onto it. Describing it is difficult, but at the same time, like it's kind of rock and roll. Maybe with a touch of like the garage rock revival from about 15 years ago. But if the drummer was really, really into King Crimson, that's kind of the vibe I got. Like it's very well played, all of it, all the instruments. But like, holy crap, the drums on this record. That's kind of was most of my review. Like, holy crap, the drums. Holy crap, all the time.
Yes, yeah. There's some just fantastic, cool, complex drum work going on in this record, which is so like fun to kind of follow. Brett, what would be the themes elements that caught your attention?
This is a very, very technical album. There's very few albums that make me wish that I had like the ridiculous room where I can sit and listen to music and milk every wave that comes out of a speaker for everything it's worth. But you know, this is one of those albums where the more I dug, the more I wondered. Like, oh, there was a lot of stuff with tone that was used on this album. It's very, very. The tone is important to all of the songs, in a way that, you know, like a normal band with, you know, well, we just need to have some dirt. There was very, very meticulously picked. That you can tell that you know, they didn't have it. They didn't use overdrive at levels that I would use overdrive. So that like when you use overdrive, you can sort of cheat. You can be sloppy and get away with it. But they were putting on display things in a clean tone that would be difficult to do sloppily with a dirtier tone. But they also used a lot of, like, there's a lot of compression on the stuff that they use. It doesn't sound like a wall of digital effects and racks of processing. It sounds very natural and minimalist, but done really well. This is an album made by musicians for musicians, I would imagine. There were some things that were done with the drums that were pretty shocking. There were drums that didn't fit with the rest of the music. There was a pretty good approximation of somebody playing a guitar in the 1960s. That like a straight up Stratocaster and a Marshall Plexi tone
Yes.
that you don't hear anymore. There's all sorts of like ridiculous stuff going on here, and a variety of it too. Like that's when we get into songs that
Yes.
there's some major variety going on here.
Yes, and it goes into some cool things as we get into some of the key tracks. Like I like it starts off with the opening track where it kind of announces what it was doing because it does a lot of those different things. The drums are fantastic. The opening track Rapids, doing the Record Breakers thing, does a really good job of kind of telling you who these guys are. Really cool drums, like cool fun guitar, and like a nice bass solo, and with like the guitars and drums, the guitar is still playing, but you still like hear the bass solo, and which is fun and fascinating, and really cool. My Loving City, which had that throwback vibe, and it just had a cool energy to it. And songs like Shaking Trees had some cool tones and some cool stuff going on in it. But I'll let you guys do a little bit better. Drew, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Well, Rapid starts off. It's got that sort of chugging guitar line that sort of gets a little bit headbang, but then it sort of moves into this like really intricate, quick motion guitar work, which is really, really cool. That chorus that sort of tops that off too, that sort of swell in it. I've said it before, I'm a sucker for that sort of thing, so you make a mark out of me very quickly for that. I'm going light, a little smooth, compared to everything else up until that point. Like it had, like up until that point on the record, there was a lot of, how should you say, a lot of crunch to it. A lot of, like I said, that classic rock, hard rock sort of undertone to a lot of it. And Light was the first one that came out and was like just smooth all the way through, which I sort of dug into a lot. And that sort of varied sound was the first tip off to like even more so than the other tracks. Was like, oh, okay, this is going to be some digging. This is going to take more than just a couple of listens through. Like this is something here. And then I'm going to go with, let me make sure I got this right. Because I think I wrote it down right. Yeah, Come, track 6. That is correct. It's the bass line in that song was so good. There was something about it. There was this groovy quality, the effects that were on it, and that bass line is that like curl your upper lip sort of like jam to it, sort of funkiness to the song that like, again, it's something I can just dig on to no end.
Yeah. Patrick, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
I'll also do the Record Breakers thing, talk about Rapids, the opening track. It just, like, these are what I wrote. This is how you fucking start a record. It's comes in with a really cool guitar line, and the drums get interesting fairly quickly into it. It's definitely kind of, it's when you hear the guitars, you expect it's going to be one thing, and then the drums come in and you're like, oh, this is a little different, just because of sort of the choices they made there. And I kind of like that they tucked the vocals back in the mix. It's treated it more like an instrument than sort of the show, which helps when you don't understand the language. The second track, My Loving City, it's a cool song. It's got a really, really good bass line going on. And then there's this part sort of midway towards the end where you get the drums, the guitar, and the bass are all doing different things, all sort of slightly out of rhythm with each other. And it's really cool and not the same. It's when you hear it, you're like, am I listening to a prog rock record? Because this sounds like a prog rock record. This doesn't sound like a sort of rock and roll, garage rock, indie rock record, because it's such a departure from whatever the rest of the genre is. And then the last song, Life, which is I think there because the drummer wanted it to be there, because it is a total like drum showcase and it's really, really technically impressive, but still enjoyable to listen to.
Mm-hmm. Brett, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
let me say everything that's been said before. Again, Rapids. I mean, it opens the album up in a very definitive way. It comes in almost like it had like a 90s grunge rock kind of thing going on. But then it breaks into like a technical display that you don't really get from anything like that. The intensity and the polished tone really came through on that track, especially with the bass solo and the bass tone. It was like compressed, but like compressed like it's just getting ready to break. And so you got that fat tone, but it doesn't. It sounds very natural and like it gets more compressed and more close to peaking. The harder the more dynamic you are with the bass, and that is a great tone. I was very, very impressed with that. Then Light, the slow jam up to that point. It had some of the best clean tone, fat, quacky guitar tone that like it was almost like somebody had a wah pedal and they just like stuck it in a place, but like it didn't sound quite like that. I'd like to know how they did it. It has a great like room filling reverb, but the groovy bass line that doesn't really follow like you would expect from Western rock music. I was pretty impressed with what they were getting out of what they were doing. I guess the one that stuck with me big time was Land. There's just the guitar tone here. It sounds like there's a Jimi Hendrix-esque solo. It's like the tone, like everything about even the play style is like a 60s turn it to 11 type sound. And that is not something you hear on albums that are made by people under the age of 50 who didn't do it when it was the cool thing to do and new. So yeah, I would like to, I am going to pick apart these songs some more on my own free time because I was impressed with some of the little nifty tricks that I have never heard before.
Yeah. Those are some fantastic tracks. It's like, and there's some fantastic sounds. Yeah. Like you said, like there's just something to dig into, like in so many different, songs, something to kind of like explore and discover on like almost every track. And it's fantastic.
Lyrical content, I can't really speak to the lyrical content. We should note that they do some pretty neat harmonizing in a way that you also don't get in Western music.
Yeah. And it's really cool. But yeah, let's bring it back around the horn for some conclusive thoughts. Drew, what are your conclusive thoughts on this album as a whole?
My conclusive thoughts on this record is that none of us were expecting this, but I think I don't mean to speak for everybody, but if currently, you haven't been able to tell, I think we pretty much all like this record. It's something that it's meaty in a way that you don't normally get. There's a lot going on. And there's a lot going on from a musicianship standpoint, tone. Like, we've went over, like, everything where, like, there's a lot. And it just ends up being a really fun record. There's an old jazz saying that sometimes musicians just have to make music for other musicians and be okay with it. And jazz musicians are no stranger to playing for a room full of musicians, and that being the only people that are there are the other musicians playing that night. And I bet you that these guys aren't unfamiliar with that either, but I bet you they also get a lot of people that can just dig on something that's this musically dense.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, what would be your conclusive thoughts on this album?
A lot of on the lines of what Drew said. This is pretty good. Really, really high level of musicianship. The drums are kind of out of this world, especially for something of this sort of what you would expect out of this genre if you listen to the other instruments. And everything's just played at such a high level, you can't help but at least appreciate it. And I actually found the songs pretty enjoyable on top of that. It wasn't just like a, technical exercise. This was, pretty fun music. It's if this had words in English and came out on the radio at the right moment, when rock music was okay again, I could see people listening to it because it is really cool. And goddamn it, the drums are amazing, and I will keep coming back to that. They, if you put a normal drummer in this band, they're pretty all right. You put the guy they did in this band, who's really, really good and not afraid to do stuff that's atypical of the genre, and turns into something really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, there is a song in English. There's "My Loving City" is entirely in English, but it's also kind of like a differently song. But yeah, they have a really cool song. Brett, what would be your conclusive thoughts?
I thought this was a pretty sweet sounding record. It's something that I'll probably hit back up. I do this, and I come here when I do to record to find things that, like, it's boring for me to retread things that I've heard before a million times. When I find something new that's impressive and that has, that does something new, something that I've never seen or heard in a way that is completely novel. I get a lot of that with the stuff that Petey brings from Asia, but this is people doing things. It's similar but completely different. The way they go about making an album like this is so foreign, but they're doing things that any band would do, and it's nice to see how they that's how they pick that out. That's how that cuts through the mix. That's how they decided to paste this song, and then it's something that keeps giving. So I was pretty thrilled about my experience. Mm-hmm. I gotta say.
Yeah. I kind of had a feeling that this would go over well, just because I've liked their sound, and when I finally got this and downloaded and bought it off of vinyl, and downloaded and checked it out, it just was impressed me so much because of what they were doing musically and how they were exploring and moving around and doing kind of different things, and because of that, I just the moment that I had the chance to come back home and copy the zip file over to my Dropbox to share it with you guys, I did, because I knew, all right, this is going to be the album I'm going to talk about. This is just a really cool, really interesting, really complex, really fun to listen to record. Really kind of fun to kind of get lost in, at least for me. I like music I can kind of zone and kind of get lost in a little bit. So that's what's really cool about this, and it shows how there's so much there's some great talent in the Korean independent scene, and it should get a little bit of a spotlight. Hopefully it does get, and hopefully the old adage of rising tide lifting all ships, with the kind of the popularity of K-pop, can help them, especially if they get if more indie bands get spotlights on K-pop Night Out, South by Southwest, or the like. More really talented, cool musicians can get a little bit of recognition, and a little bit of work, and can keep kicking ass. This is a cool record, and I encourage y'all to check it out, purchase it, and support this band, so they keep doing their thing. Life and Time, Land. Those are our thoughts. Now we get to our haiku reviews, the main event of the evening, the moment we've all been waiting for. We get to our haikus, sum it all up in poetic form. I'm going to maintain initiative order. Drew, what is your haiku?
A little hard rock with a dash of some smooth funk. SK wins again.
Yes. Escape. Patrick, what is your haiku?
Prog rock level drums on an indie rock album. Gem from Korea.
Brett, what is your haiku?
Korean indie. Wasn't expected. Rock and roll shocker.
Yes. Two in the.
That is the pinnacle of my haikuing right there.
Rock and roll shocker. Yes. All right, my haiku. Oh, here it is. My haiku. Complex rhythm and fun rock musicianship from three talented dudes. Pretty straightforward. Also, I love the SK shout out. Yeah, being a Wyverns fan. But yes, that is all for our thoughts on Life and Time Land. Not to be confused with The Land, but that's where Drew's from. Just Land. You can of course check it out. I'm gonna provide the link in the show notes to their page on vinyl. You can see it there. You have to go to the app to purchase it. But if you look around, it's also on iTunes. I should say that it's also on iTunes. But vinyl does support the artist more. But it is, I believe, available on iTunes, so you can go check it out there as well. But yeah, go check it out. Presumably, the next album will be on our Spotify album. We'll find out now. The next album is provided by, I believe, Patrick. Patrick, what do you got for us next week?
I'm going to keep it rocking with Clutch and their album Robot Hive Exodus.
So check that out. Get ready for the talk next week. Get ready for next week's episode. We will have a fun discussion about that. But that's next week. This is this week, and that's it for us. You can find us. You can of course find us all over the internet. Patrick is at the Swagger. Brett is at HBBBBBITYBIBBRD. Drew is at Extrusive I'm at PD Rave. The show's at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com. RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com. Rebelli.net for this and other shows. Rebelli TV on YouTube and on Twitch and all the other things. iTunes, Stitcher, all the places where you can find podcasts. Subscribe, like, share, do the things. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
Spudger's gonna spudge.
Two honey wyverns, whoa, wee hi-yo, whoa, two honey wyverns, whoa, soon later we hi-yo, we are the one. There's always next year. Go SK, wyverns. Annyeong, fighting.
Hey, you know,
There's also this year.
I'm glad America is the only place that has bad baseball songs.
Yes.
I mean,
It's certainly more clever than Go Cubs Go.
or Phillies Fever.
No, the worst one is the Fly Eagles Fly for the Philadelphia Eagles. That's the worst.
Antena Juan, na 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 na, Antena Juan.